Alright, so on to Sherlock Holmes, A Game of Shadows. Well, this one's going to be a little bit easier to describe in terms of reviewing the movies, because the first Sherlock Holmes, there was that whole mystery aspect to it. This movie's a lot more upfront with what we should expect come the end. So that's kind of a plus and a negative for anyone who might have not liked the fact that it was so confusing because of the mystery. You won't know until the very end. This time, it's very straightforward. You know what'll happen. So the beginning of the movie pretty much starts with the explosion of that embassy or ambassador's place or whatnot, essentially leading to the whole, kind of the overarching atmosphere that these two countries are going to go to war. That's kind of just, it's not something that's necessarily foreboding throughout the entire film, but more that it is kind of just something that's there but really isn't spoken about. So let's move on to Robert Downey Jr. and Jude Law playing the respective characters of Sherlock Holmes and John Watson. Sherlock Holmes is kind of become very withdrawn from society. Not really surprising considering his character from the first movie. This time, he has now transformed his room into kind of a jungle of sorts. Dr. Watson, I didn't realize that he had a limp in the first movie. Maybe he got hurt in some capacity, which caused the limp. I'm not quite sure. Anyways, Watson drops by and pretty much reminds Sherlock Holmes that, well, it's a stag party or bachelor party for some who don't. When you're watching the movie, it makes sense because Watson is going to get married the next day. So yeah, it's his bachelor party. Well, so before that, Sherlock Watson's old room, which has now been transformed into kind of a web of conspiracies, if you will, because there's a lot of like thread pointing towards Professor Moriarty. Actually, end up skipping ahead of the part where we get to see Irene Adler again. More or less, Sherlock Holmes is kind of keeping an eye on her. It appears that they kind of have a relationship of sorts at the beginning, although that's more of an implied than an actual straight out said type of thing. And it's kind of swept under the carpet, or sorry, swept under the rug by about midway through the movie. Anyways, you see that Irene's still working for Moriarty. Not really that big of a thing to say, but her character ends up getting poisoned and dies. I think they said that he ended up like giving her Moriarty ended up like somehow managing to give her like a form of tuberculosis. Essentially killed her right. You don't see it until a little bit later, which I don't know why we didn't just see it right away. Whatever. It's one of those things you don't really need to bother with. Well, anyways, so we move on to this is where we meet Mycroft Holmes, Sherlock's brother, played by Stephen Fry. By the way, Jared Harris playing Moriarty and Stephen Fry, great additions to the film. Oh my god, are they like? There's one part which I'll bring up later with Mycroft that's just amazing. So you got the stag party, and this is where we get introduced to Madame Simza. I guess her last name is Heron, but not a big deal. This is played by Naomi Rapace, who you probably know from The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, or the Millennium Trilogy, as it were. Her character, she is a gypsy, which I think was kind of conveyed in the trailers, but for those who don't know, she's a gypsy. Initially, she ends up getting chased by this assassin, which we see in the trailer. Sherlock, the trademark him slowing down time to go through the whole motion, that ends up getting screwed up by Simza. So I kind of liked how that kind of, the two times we saw it, it ended up going against what Holmes was actually thinking, in a way. Anyway, so this goes into kind of a bit of a fight scene, during the process of which Watson is kind of pissed that Sherlock ended up having the stag party, which is these two and Sherlock's brother. And so Watson's like, well, I'm not going to make this a whole awesome night. I'm going to go gamble. So he was gambling, and long story short, Sherlock ends up breaking through the door and knocking all of Watson's money out of his hand, so people start trying to steal all of Watson's money. Kind of a funny scene. So, I guess the long story short is that the assassin ends up getting knocked into some water. As far as I know, he's not dead. And Simza kind of ends up disappearing. So then Sherlock and Dr. John Watson end up driving throughout the night. This as you might recall from the first movie, they had kind of more of like the horse-drawn carriage. Apparently now we are in an era where the motor carriages, as it were, are starting to become uh, made. So Watson, being a doctor, has his resources towards getting one. So Holmes drives throughout the night and gets Watson to his wedding in time. And this is where we end up moving into the first showdown between Sherlock Holmes and Moriarty. I'm not going to ruin any of those exchanges for you, but long story short, Sherlock pretty much tells Moriarty that he believes that he's the guy who bombed the embassy or whatever it was. And this leads to Watson and his fiance being on their honeymoon, and Holmes trying to stop them from getting assassinated by Moriarty's men. This leads to the whole kind of cat and mouse chase that's going on with Holmes is trying to stop Moriarty from all the stuff he's doing, and trying to also subsequently prove that Moriarty is the man behind this, not just, the guy behind the scenes. If you're wondering what ends up happening with Watson's fiance, she ends up with Mycroft after Sherlock throws her out of a train. It sounds a lot worse than it actually is. Once you watch the movie, you'll understand. And this is more for her protection, so she's not going to get killed by Moriarty. And I guess the remainder of the movie, which I don't really want to ruin, is simply, like I said, cat and mouse chase and them trying to stop an assassination attempt is really the overarching thing. There's a lot of stuff I'm missing here, and that's the entire point is so you guys end up going to go watch this movie, because honestly, it's a good film. I don't understand why people aren't watching it. I assume partially because it's right before Christmas, so they'll go see it on Christmas Day. Hopefully, cross my fingers. So, pros and cons. Pros, you got Robert Downey Jr. back as Sherlock. You got Jude Law as Dr. John Watson. You got great additions from Naomi Rapace, Jared Harris, and Stephen Fry. So it's nice to see some new additions and we knew initially that Rachel McAdams wasn't going to have a big part. Her part is like 5-10 minutes long. Very short. On the downside, however, there is a bit more action than I would have preferred, because this is Sherlock Holmes. There should be a lot more mystery and dialogue. And sometimes dialogue can get boring, I'll admit that. But to pretty much, and I think this was partially because they ended up forcing the sequel like that. And so to get a sequel kind of fast-tracked, it's not going to be very well thought out, I guess you could say. And that's not to say this movie isn't thought out. The ending will probably put you on the on the edge of your seats, going, "What, did they seriously just do that?" Not going to ruin it, but I think that's kind of the major focus here is the fact that it's more action oriented. So if you're looking for a good action film, this is definitely the one to see. If you're hoping for more of a mystery suspense with some action and humor, you might be a little disappointed. My favorite scene from the movie, I don't think you actually got to see anything from the trailers, is when Simza and her group of gypsies, along with Watson and Holmes, end up trying to cross the border without actually being, getting caught at the border patrol. So they figured they have to go over this mountain, so they get horses, and Holmes can't ride a horse. So they end up finding him a Shetland pony, which is just hilarious. I think you guys will love it. There's actually a couple, the ending is definitely a close second, just because you won't see it coming. And it's actually rather cool. You'll understand what I'm talking about when you go see it. So, for a score then, I'm going to give this a 4 out of 5. And I did give the first movie a 4 out of 5. This is like a lower 4. Like if Sherlock Holmes, the first one, was a B, this would be like in the B- area. It's still a 4, but just not as good. It's close, but not as. So, yeah, that is my review of Sherlock Holmes, A Game of Shadows.